Hi again, everybody. This is Toby O'Hara. Again, I'm the sculptor for the miniatures on Oathsworn Into the Deepwood, and this is the second video in the series of videos where we're trying to give you a behind-the-scenes look at the manufacturing process for the miniatures in Oathsworn Into the Deepwood. In the first video, if you remember, we established a couple of key terms that are going to be important for our discussions going forward. In that last video, we had a quick discussion on different material types that are used in the miniatures, and we established these two big terms, being pole direction and undercutting, and how undercutting is an undesirable term or an undesirable condition on your models that is created based on your pole direction choices. And in order to get rid of undercutting, we talked about what are the steps that are involved in getting rid of undercutting and the process of resolving the undercuts. And those choices were resculpting, filling in the undercuts, cutting it into multiple pieces and gluing it back together, or changing the pole direction. So in that example, it was kind of an overly simplified example that was just intended to show you the best way to define the terms. But obviously most of the miniatures that you're going to see in a board game aren't this simple. They're very complex characters. So based on what we learned last video, let's take those principles and actually look at a real world example like what we're going to have on the table in the game Oathsworn. So we're going to use this companion character model as the example, and this is one of the simplest models in the game, and it still will show you how much work will go into just getting something as simple as this onto the table. So this is a companion character model. This is one of the models you would use if your Oathsworn character fell in combat, was injured, he lost all his health. You would use one of these models to kind of replace him, and he has its own set of abilities, and they're not as powerful as an Oathsworn, but it allows you to continue the fight, and you don't have to sit there while your friends finish off the monster. You have to watch. So this is a companion character, and what we're going to do is look at what it takes to manufacture this model, and these are the steps we're going to go through. The first step we're going to do is we're going to choose the best pole direction that has the least amount of undercutting, and we're going to have undercuts on some level or another, so we're going to choose whichever pole direction has the least number of undercuts or the easiest undercuts to resolve. So once we've chosen the pole direction, we'll find all the areas where there's undercuts, and then we'll come up with all the different ways we can resolve those undercuts and get rid of them. And then after we've identified all the possible ways of getting rid of the undercuts, we'll choose which one is best. So for this first example, let's take a look at this character kind of in real time in my sculpting software that I use to sculpt all the miniatures. So the first thing we want to do is choose a pole direction. So just for starters, this could be one of our pole direction orientations right here. So if you imagine the pole direction being straight into the screen as you're viewing it, if we chose this as the pole direction, obviously the sword is casting a shadow onto the body, which means we would have this as an undercut. So this orientation gives us at least one undercut that we'd have to figure out how to resolve. Another way to mold it would be to allow this to be our mold direction straight into the screen, and we've gotten rid of the undercut that was created between the sword and the body, but now we have a new undercut down here between the legs. We'd have this big gap in here we would have to figure out how to resolve. So another way of molding it with a pole direction would be something like this. So now here at least we've gotten rid of the undercutting between the sword and the body, we've got rid of the undercutting between the legs, but now we've got this new undercut that's created between the arms. So of those three choices, we have this one. Getting rid of that undercut could be complex because obviously you can't fill that in with material, so we'd be cutting stuff up. We've also got this one, which we'd have to figure out how to fill in all that area. Then we've got this one, which at least we've gotten rid of two out of the three undercuts, and we just have to figure out how to resolve the hands. So of those three choices, this one is probably going to be the best choice, this direction right here, because now we just have to figure out what to do about the arms. So we've established that this will be our pole direction, and the color coding comes from, just so you can see where it comes from, when it's oriented like this. The green areas will be in one side of the mold and the red areas will be in another side of the mold. So this is how you can tell where you've got undercuts. So when you look between the arms, you've got a red area right on the back side of a green, and then you see how it goes green, red, green. That's another way to show you an undercut. So obviously we've got to find a way to get rid of that. And that's just where those colors come from. But so we've established what our pull direction is. Now we've got to figure out how to get rid of that undercut that's between the arms right here. And our choices, again, if you remember from the last video, are we can resculpt the model, or we can fill in that gap with material, or we can cut the model into pieces and then glue it all back together. And since we've chosen the pull direction already, we'll skip this at the end because we just, as I just demonstrated, we found what is the best possible pull direction for this model. So let's look at resculpting. When you resculpt something, again, our objective is to get rid of that gap in the between the arms and the body. In order to do that from a resculpting standpoint, our only real choice is to change his pose, right? We have to push his arms against the body to close that gap. So if we look at what that looks like, that's what it takes to change his pose and close off that gap so that it's now filled in. Now, that was our original look, and then this is the resculpted look. So it's close. It's not great, but it would allow us to mold. It would allow us to mold it just like this without the undercuts, and I guess it looks similar to it. So that would be an option, but I don't know that that's the best option. So let's go look at the other ways of doing it. So again, that's what it looks like when you resculpt it and basically push all the geometry together. So that's one option. And as you can see here, I was just showing you the difference between the original version and the resculpted version. But let's look at how to fill in it with the filling in the undercut with just material. So as I'm showing right here, we're able to hold the pose to the same silhouette and the same shape as we had before, but now we're filling it in with all that material. And as you can see, that's not really the best looking model on the planet. If we look at that on the table, what that would look like. I don't think you would want to have a miniature on your table looking like that, because you'd have all of this cool stuff going on, and then you'd see this big, huge chunk of plastic in the middle there. It would allow you to mold it like this for sure, but is that really the best looking model that we could have? I don't think so. So between the two, between filling in the gap with material or just simply resculpting it, I think resculpting it would be the better of the two choices. But we still have a third choice in the matter, and that's cutting it into pieces. And simply we look at what two pieces, or the minimum number of pieces, would be required to preserve as much of the original shape as possible. So for this example here, if we cut the arms off at the shoulder and kept the sword in his hands, we could mold the part just the way you see it right here, where your pull direction goes into the screen. We could mold this in one piece, mold this in one piece, and then glue everything back together. So what that would look like is this. I'll select that, go like this, so you can see it in real time. So as you can see, just by cutting those pieces off, gluing them back together, we can actually get something that looks exactly the same as the original sculpt. So this is our new model with the pieces in pieces and glued back together, and then here was our original one. And as you can see, it's the same. We're able to preserve all the detail. It's the same shape. We didn't have to push the arms into the body. We didn't have to fill any material. Just by cutting those arms off, we've now got what we originally had designed. It's as close as possible to the original sculpt, as you can see right there. So let's kind of take a review of everything we've looked at so far. We resculpted it and had a result. We filled in the material and had a result, and then we've cut it up into pieces and glued it back together. We saw that the undercut, just filling in that undercut, is not an option. It just looks hideous. So it really comes down to our last two choices, or the first and the last choice, which was either we resculpt the model and push everything against the body to get rid of the undercut, or we cut this into pieces and glue it all back together. So obviously, for what we're trying to accomplish for the miniatures in Oathsworn, we're trying to preserve as much of that detail as humanly possible. So our choice for this model in specific is we're going to cut the arms off and glue them all back together so that it looks just like what the original sculpt with. Now that's an easy thing to say, right? Because we say we just chose what looks the coolest, but that's not always possible. There's a lot of other considerations that have to come into that will factor into that decision. And I'm going to get into that in the next video that we do. But for today, all I wanted to demonstrate was what our choices were in terms of resolving undercuts, choosing the best pull direction, and evaluating all the solutions in an objective way so that you can make the best choice. Now, again, we've made a choice here just based on coolness and look, but there's also a monetary factor that plays into that whole factor, that whole decision process. But that kind of requires a whole video. The only thing I wanted you to take away from today was show you a real world example of how do you properly mold something that's complex like this. And like I said, this is one of the most simple models that are in Oathsworn. You know, what would you do with something that was like the Broodmother, which is a massive model where we've got, let me do this, turn that off. Let's look at the Broodmother really quick. So this was the Broodmother that everybody remembers. She's massive, right? You know, trying to find the right pull direction without undercuts on something with all this detail is impossible. So we have to do all kinds of things to preserve this detail. And to show you exactly what she'll end up being, this is my original sculpt of the Broodmother model. And then this is what she looks like when she's going to be manufactured. And you can see just by clicking between them, we're preserving nearly all of the detail with just some minor adjustments on her hand pose. And in order to accomplish that with saving all that detail, we've had to make her into this many pieces. So and there's actually one other piece, I think, around the belly that she'll be made into. But so you could see this is what it takes to preserve all of that detail on somebody like the Broodmother and how many pieces we have to cut her into. But at least the end result is she looks almost exactly the same between the two. So the one, the original sculpt is this. I'll put it side by side, you can see it. So that's your original sculpt. And then this is what she looks like during manufacture. So we're able to preserve all that detail, and that's something that we're really proud of. But obviously, to get there, you really have to cut her up into a bunch of pieces. Now, don't worry, all this is going to be glued together at the manufacturer. You won't have to worry about assembling anything. But it's just showing you what it takes to get all of that detail preserved into a model, something like that. So with what we showed you here today, you should have enough information to look at models that you have at home and to see if you could figure out how they were made. Just follow these steps right here, and you'll be able to probably figure it out really quickly of how any model that's in any of your board games at home was made. Just grab any model. The first thing you want to do is you want to look for any lines where cuts might have happened. So for example, like with this one, you would see a line on each of the shoulders because this is going to be made in two pieces. You'll see a line at each shoulder where the glue joint was. So once you find all of the different cut lines, it'll tell you how many pieces that model was made out of. Then with the individual pieces, what you want to look at for each piece, you want to see if you can figure out what the pull direction was for each of those individual pieces. And the quickest way to find out a pull direction is look for voids or recesses, similar to, let's do this, similar to like with this example here on our character. Remember, this was our pull direction on this character. And if you look at something like the void on the visor, if all you saw was this, you would say either this was the pull direction or this was the pull direction just by looking at the visor. Because obviously if the pull direction was like this, you wouldn't see the visor, and if the pull direction was like that, you wouldn't see the visor. So that means the pull direction either had to be like this or it had to be like that. So if you're looking at pieces at home, do the same thing. Just look for the cut lines, and then for each piece, look to see if you can find voids. That'll tell you your pull direction. And then once you found the pull direction, you know exactly how the part was made. You know how many pieces it was cut into, and you know exactly what the mold direction was. And if you look at a model and you don't see any cut lines, that means that the whole model was molded in one piece, and all you need to find is the pull direction. So go ahead and give that a try. And if you want to share that with us, if you want to have a discussion about it and see if you're able to figure out how a miniature was made, just post it to our Facebook page, and I'll see if I can't join in the discussion with you and talk about if the best way that was made. So hopefully this video gave you a better understanding of a real world example of how a miniature is made. In the next series of updates, we're going to actually get into the economics and the logistics behind making this decision, right? When I made this decision, it was really easy. I said, oh, I'm choosing that one because it looks the coolest. But there's a cost with that. And there's other considerations like the manufacturing part of it that we have to consider. So while that looked like it was an easy decision, it's not. And so the next video, we're going to talk about what the economics were. And we're going to also compare the processes between the PVC and ABS material and the HIPS material. And then we're also going to look at some of the quality factors. And I'm also going to dispel a myth that some people have that think just because it's made out of HIPS, it's a better model, or it's a better model than a PVC or an ABS model. That's not the truth. And I'll explain to you why in that next video. So I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one.